Some men mistake silence for weakness, until the truth changes everything. The sound that echoed through cell block D that gray Monday morning wasn't a shout or an alarm. It was the sharp crack of an open hand meeting another man's cheek, followed by laughter rolling across the prison cafeteria like a wave that everyone had learned to ride. Travis Cole leaned back with an amused smile, soaking in the approval of the men around him. For years, he had ruled this section of the prison without needing to raise his voice. Reputation did the work for him. New arrivals quickly learned that if Travis wanted your attention, you gave it. If he wanted your lunch tray, you handed it over. And if he decided to embarrass you just to entertain the room, nobody dared interfere. Today, his attention had settled on the newest inmate. Marcus Hayes stood nearly 6 feet 4 inches tall, broad-shouldered beneath a plain gray prison uniform that looked almost too small for his frame. His dark skin contrasted with the pale concrete walls surrounding him, while his calm eyes remained fixed somewhere beyond the noisy cafeteria, as if the room itself barely existed. He had arrived less than 24 hours earlier. No gang tattoos, no loud introductions, no desperate attempts to impress anyone. Just a weathered duffel bag, a worn Bible with softened leather corners, and a quiet habit of thanking every correctional officer who opened a gate for him. That alone had already made him an oddity inside a place where kindness usually disappeared behind locked steel doors. Travis stepped closer, studying him with growing irritation. The new guy didn't look frightened. He didn't look angry either. He simply looked peaceful. That bothered Travis more than any insult ever could. Around them, dozens of inmates slowed their conversations. Plastic trays rested on scratched metal tables. Coffee cups hovered halfway to waiting lips. Even the television mounted high in the corner seemed forgotten as curiosity spread through the room. "Hey, preacher," Travis called with a grin. "You deaf, or you just think you're better than everybody else?" Marcus slowly turned his head. His expression never changed. "Good morning," he answered quietly. Just 2 simple words. Respectful. Calm. The response drew another burst of laughter. Travis shook his head in disbelief. "You got jokes." Before anyone expected it, he reached forward and gave Marcus a quick slap across the face, more mocking than harmful, treating the moment like cheap entertainment rather than real conflict. Several inmates laughed even harder. A few looked away. Others waited eagerly, expecting the new man to explode. Instead, Marcus lifted one hand, gently touched the corner of his mouth, noticed a faint trace of blood on his fingertips, then wiped it away with remarkable patience. He looked directly into Travis's eyes, not with fear, not with hatred, but with something almost impossible to understand inside those prison walls. "Compassion. Is that all?" Marcus asked softly. The laughter faded faster than it had begun. Something about his voice carried no challenge, no sarcasm, no surrender. It was simply honest. Travis frowned. That wasn't the reaction he had planned for. The cafeteria felt strangely colder. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, while morning sunlight filtered through reinforced windows, casting long bars of light across the concrete floor. Near the serving counter, Correctional Officer Raymond Brooks stopped writing in his clipboard. At 63 years old, Brooks had spent more than 3 decades working inside state prisons. He believed he had seen every kind of man imaginable. Yet as Marcus lowered his hand, Brooks noticed something that made his heartbeat stumble. It wasn't the silence. It wasn't the confidence. It was the way Marcus shifted his feet without even realizing it. Balanced, relaxed, effortless. The kind of footwork Brooks had not seen in nearly 20 years. Officer Raymond Brooks kept staring long after the cafeteria had returned to its usual rhythm. Plastic trays scraped across metal tables, distant conversations slowly resumed, and the television hanging from the concrete wall filled the silence with the muted sound of a daytime news broadcast. Yet Brooks barely heard any of it. His eyes remained fixed on Marcus Hayes as the new inmate calmly picked up his lunch tray and walked toward an empty corner table without looking back even once. Most men entering Cedar Ridge Correctional Facility arrived carrying fear on their shoulders. Some tried to hide it behind loud voices. Others joined groups within hours just to survive. Marcus didn't either. He sat alone, bowed his head for a brief moment of prayer, then quietly began eating as though he were sitting at an ordinary kitchen table instead of inside one of the toughest maximum security facilities in the state. Brooks had learned to trust instinct more than paperwork. Prison files told one story. Body language usually revealed another. And something about Marcus refused to fit the record that had arrived the previous evening. According to official documents, Marcus Hayes was serving time after accepting responsibility in a financial conspiracy case connected to a family-owned trucking company. No history of assault. No gang affiliation. No disciplinary reports from county jail. Nothing remarkable except his unusually calm psychological evaluation, which described him as emotionally resilient under extreme pressure. Brooks remembered smiling when he first read those words. Everyone believed they handled pressure well until prison tested them. But what he had witnessed only minutes earlier forced him to reconsider everything. Marcus had not frozen. He had not panicked. He had not reacted from pride. He had simply absorbed humiliation with a level of control Brooks had only seen in people who had spent years mastering themselves. Across the cafeteria, Travis watched Marcus from another table. His smile had faded. Something about the encounter lingered in his thoughts like an unfinished sentence. Normally, one public embarrassment settled the order of things. New inmates either challenged him immediately or avoided him forever. Marcus had done neither. That uncertainty irritated Travis more than open resistance ever could. Meanwhile, Marcus folded the paper napkin beside his tray with careful precision before carrying his dishes to the return window. As he walked away, another inmate accidentally bumped into him while balancing 2 cups of coffee. One cup tipped slightly, spilling across Marcus's sleeve. The younger inmate immediately looked terrified. "I am sorry," he said quickly. "That was my fault." Marcus glanced down at the stain, smiled gently, and replied, "It happens. Do not worry about it." The younger man blinked in disbelief before quietly thanking him. Brooks noticed every second of the exchange. Kindness inside prison was often viewed with suspicion because almost everyone expected hidden motives. Marcus showed none. Later that afternoon, inmates were escorted into the recreation yard beneath a bright Carolina sky. Razor wire shimmered above the tall fences, while warm sunlight reflected against weathered concrete. Groups gathered around basketball courts, weight benches, and walking tracks. Marcus chose none of them. Instead, he found a quiet patch of pavement near the far fence and stood alone. At first glance, it looked as though he was simply stretching after hours inside a cramped cell. Brooks happened to be assigned to the observation tower overlooking the yard. Through his binoculars, he watched Marcus slowly shift his weight from one foot to the other. Left foot, right foot, small circles, tiny pivots, smooth balance. There was no wasted motion. Every movement flowed naturally into the next with remarkable precision. Brooks felt an old memory stir deep inside him. Nearly 20 years earlier, before becoming a correctional officer, he had worked security for several nationally televised boxing events across the East Coast. He had spent countless nights standing only a few feet from championship rings, watching elite athletes warm up before millions of viewers tuned in. Those same quiet foot movements, the same relaxed shoulders, the same effortless rhythm. Brooks lowered the binoculars and frowned. "No," he whispered to himself. "It cannot be." Yet the feeling refused to leave him. Somewhere inside the prison archives, buried beneath years of forgotten records and faded newspapers, Brooks believed there was a name connected to those movements. He simply had to remember where he had seen it. The question followed Officer Raymond Brooks through the rest of his shift like an echo that refused to disappear. Where had he seen those movements before? It was not simply the footwork. It was the discipline behind every motion, the invisible confidence of a man who never wasted energy trying to prove himself. Brooks finished his evening rounds, signed the last security log, and instead of heading home, he unlocked a narrow records room tucked beneath the administration building. Dust floated through the yellow light as rows of aging filing cabinets stretched toward the back wall. Most officers avoided this place unless absolutely necessary. Brooks walked directly to the oldest cabinets marked sports outreach and community events, memories guiding him more than labels. Years before working in corrections, he had spent nearly a decade providing security for professional sporting events across North Carolina, Virginia, and Tennessee. Faces had blurred together over time, but great athletes left impressions that never completely disappeared. He slowly opened drawer after drawer, flipping through brittle newspaper clippings, faded event programs, and photographs whose colors had nearly vanished. Meanwhile, inside cell block D, another conversation was quietly taking shape. Travis Cole leaned against the second-floor railing, watching Marcus below as inmates returned from evening recreation. "There is something wrong with that guy," one of Travis's friends muttered. "He is either scared out of his mind or he thinks he is better than everyone." Travis folded his arms. Nobody stays that calm unless they are hiding something. Across the tier, Marcus entered his small cell without saying a word. His roommate, an older inmate named Leonard Price, had already noticed what everyone else had. "You know," Leonard said cautiously while sitting on the lower bunk. Most people would have answered that kind of disrespect differently. Marcus placed his Bible on the narrow metal shelf beside his bed before offering a small smile. "Sometimes people are carrying battles you cannot see." Leonard frowned. "You were talking about him?" Marcus nodded once. "Angry people usually need peace more than punishment." Leonard stared at him, unsure whether he had just heard wisdom or complete foolishness. In 30 years behind bars, he had never met anyone who sounded like Marcus Hayes. The lights dimmed as evening count began. Cell doors closed one after another with heavy metallic echoes rolling down the corridor. Outside, rain clouds drifted across the moon, leaving the prison wrapped in quiet shadows broken only by distant footsteps and the occasional buzz of fluorescent lights. Downstairs in the records room, Brooks suddenly froze. Halfway through another worn file folder, a glossy photograph slipped onto the floor. He bent down, picked it up, and felt his pulse quicken. The picture showed a packed arena beneath bright television lights. Thousands of fans filled the seats while one man stood in the center of the ring wearing a championship belt across his shoulders. His face looked younger. His hair was shorter, but the eyes were unmistakable. Calm. Focused. The caption beneath the photograph read, "Heavyweight champion Marcus Hayes defends his world title before a sold-out crowd." Brooks slowly lowered himself into an old wooden chair. "It really is you," he whispered. His hands trembled as he searched deeper into the folder. Newspaper after newspaper described Marcus as one of the most respected champions in modern boxing, admired not only for his victories, but for refusing to humiliate defeated opponents. Headlines praised his sportsmanship as much as his talent. Interviews quoted him saying that character mattered longer than trophies. Brooks leaned back, trying to understand how a man once celebrated across national television had quietly disappeared into a state prison without anyone recognizing him. At that exact moment, only a few hundred feet away, Travis was already making plans for the following morning, convinced that one more public humiliation would finally force the quiet newcomer to break. He had absolutely no idea that the name buried inside those dusty newspaper clippings was about to change everything inside Cedar Ridge Correctional Facility. Morning arrived beneath a blanket of low-gray clouds, and Cedar Ridge Correctional Facility woke to the familiar rhythm of steel doors unlocking one after another. The loudspeaker announced breakfast. While inmates streamed into the main corridor, their conversations blending with the clatter of boots against polished concrete. Marcus Hayes joined the line without rushing, offering a polite nod to the officer opening the final security gate. Officer Raymond Brooks returned the greeting, but his thoughts were far from routine. The folded newspaper clipping rested inside his uniform pocket, and every time he felt its edges against the fabric, he remembered the championship photograph from the night before. He had verified the records 3 different times before leaving the archive. There was no mistake. The quiet inmate carrying a worn Bible through cell block D had once stood beneath the brightest lights in professional boxing, celebrated across the country for both his skill and his humility. Brooks could not understand why Marcus had never mentioned it. Perhaps the answer was buried somewhere inside the court records. Perhaps it was hidden inside the pain Marcus carried behind those calm eyes. Whatever the reason, Brooks knew one thing with certainty. If Travis Cole discovered the truth before someone stopped him, the entire balance of the prison could change in a matter of minutes. Across the cafeteria, Travis had already gathered several inmates around his usual table. Their laughter echoed across the room as he pointed toward Marcus, who quietly carried his breakfast tray to the same corner seat he had chosen every morning. "He still thinks ignoring me is going to work," Travis said with a confident grin. "Today he either speaks up, or everybody learns exactly where he belongs." His friends chuckled, expecting another easy display of dominance. None of them noticed Brooks watching from the serving line, his expression growing more concerned with every passing second. Marcus unfolded his napkin, bowed his head briefly, and whispered another quiet prayer before touching his food. Leonard Price leaned closer from the opposite side of the table. "You know he is coming back," Leonard said softly. Marcus smiled without looking up. "Most storms eventually pass." Leonard shook his head. "Not this one." Marcus looked across the cafeteria, meeting Travis's eyes. For only a moment before returning to his breakfast. There was no fear in his face. There was no challenge either. Only the same quiet composure that seemed almost impossible inside these walls. That calm only fueled Travis's frustration. He stood from his chair and began walking across the cafeteria, each step drawing more attention than the last. Conversations gradually faded. Plastic forks paused halfway to waiting mouths. Even inmates who wanted no part of the confrontation instinctively looked toward the center aisle. Brooks took one slow step forward but stopped himself. Prison policy allowed officers to intervene only when an actual threat became unavoidable. For now, all he could do was watch. Travis stopped beside Marcus's table and rested one hand against the metal surface. "I asked around," he said with a mocking smile. "Nobody knows who you are." Marcus folded his napkin neatly before answering. "That is all right." Travis laughed. "You really think acting peaceful makes you strong?" Marcus slowly looked up. "Peace takes more strength than anger ever will." The words were calm, almost gentle, but they landed harder than anyone expected. A strange silence settled across the cafeteria. Several inmates exchanged uncertain glances. Brooks felt the newspaper clipping inside his pocket once again. He knew exactly how much truth stood behind those simple words. Travis did not. To him, Marcus was still nothing more than a quiet newcomer refusing to play by prison rules. Yet somewhere beyond the cafeteria windows, the morning sun finally broke through the clouds, casting long beams of light across the concrete floor as though the day itself was preparing to reveal a truth that could no longer remain hidden. The afternoon settled over Cedar Ridge with an unusual stillness, as though even the prison itself sensed that something invisible had shifted. Clouds drifted slowly across the pale blue sky beyond the razor wire, softening the sunlight that spilled into the recreation yard. Marcus Hayes stood near the outer fence exactly where Officer Raymond Brooks had seen him the day before. His movements were slow, controlled, almost meditative. He was not trying to impress anyone. His hands rose and lowered with quiet precision, his feet gliding across the concrete in small measured steps that looked effortless until someone truly paid attention. Brooks watched from the observation tower, the folded newspaper clipping still tucked safely inside his pocket. Every few minutes, he glanced from Marcus to Travis Cole, who remained surrounded by his usual circle of followers near the weight benches. Travis laughed loudly whenever someone looked his way, determined to convince everyone that he remained completely in control. Yet Brooks noticed something different. Travis kept looking back toward Marcus. Curiosity had quietly replaced certainty. Leonard Price slowly walked across the yard and stopped beside Marcus. For several seconds, neither man spoke. The breeze carried the distant sound of a basketball striking pavement while birds circled high above the prison walls. Finally, Leonard broke the silence. "You could make all of this stop if you simply told them who you are." Marcus smiled faintly without taking his eyes off the horizon. "Names only matter to people who need recognition." Leonard shook his head. "Your name matters because it explains why nothing scares you." Marcus looked down at his weathered hands. Thick calluses crossed his knuckles, reminders of years spent inside bright arenas where thousands of strangers once chanted his name. Those days felt like another lifetime now. "Fear never disappeared," Marcus said quietly. "I simply learned that it does not deserve to make my decisions." Leonard considered those words carefully before asking the question that had been growing inside him since Marcus first arrived. "Were you really famous?" Marcus remained silent for several moments. Then he answered with complete honesty. "I was fortunate enough to achieve things I never imagined. I earned titles. I filled arenas. I believed success could protect the people I loved." His expression softened. "I was wrong." Leonard noticed the sadness that briefly crossed Marcus's face, but wisely chose not to ask another question. Some stories revealed themselves only when the time was right. Across the yard, Travis watched the quiet conversation from a distance. "What do you think they are talking about?" one of his friends asked. Travis folded his arms. "Whatever it is, Tomorrow, everybody stops treating him like he is special. His voice sounded confident, but it lacked the certainty it had carried only a day earlier. Brooks heard enough to feel concern tighten inside his chest. He understood Travis's personality well enough to know that wounded pride often searched for one final opportunity to prove itself. As evening approached, inmates were escorted back toward their housing units. Before Marcus stepped through the final security gate, Brooks called his name for the first time. Marcus turned politely. Brooks hesitated, studying the calm face before him. "Mr. Hayes," he said quietly, "there are some chapters in a person's life that never truly disappear." Marcus held his gaze for a moment, then offered a gentle smile that suggested he understood far more than the officer had actually said. Without another word, he continued toward his cell. Brooks slipped the old newspaper clipping back into his pocket and watched him disappear down the corridor, realizing that by sunrise the truth hidden inside that folded piece of paper would almost certainly refuse to stay hidden any longer. The next morning began with an unusual sense of anticipation that no one could quite explain. Word traveled quickly inside Cedar Ridge, even when nobody knew the full story. By breakfast, whispers floated from one table to another. Some inmates claimed the quiet newcomer had once been a professional athlete. Others dismissed the rumor as another prison myth that would disappear before lunch. Marcus Hayes ignored every conversation around him. He carried his tray to the same corner table, thanked the kitchen worker who handed him his coffee, and bowed his head for a brief prayer. His routine never changed. Across the room, Travis Cole watched in silence. For the first time since Marcus had arrived, he did not immediately stand or make another sarcastic remark. Instead, he studied Marcus with growing uncertainty. Confidence was beginning to compete with curiosity, and curiosity was slowly becoming doubt. Officer Raymond Brooks entered the cafeteria carrying a thin manila folder beneath his arm. He had barely slept the night before. Every page inside that folder confirmed the same extraordinary truth. Newspaper articles, championship rankings, charity events, photographs with young athletes, interviews praising Marcus not only as a champion inside the ring, but as a mentor outside of it. Brooks stopped beside the supervising lieutenant before quietly placing the folder on the desk. The lieutenant looked through the documents one by one, then slowly lifted his eyes toward Marcus. "That is him?" he asked almost in disbelief. Brooks nodded. "Every record matches." The lieutenant looked back at the photograph of a younger Marcus wearing a heavyweight championship belt beneath bright arena lights. "Hard to believe someone could go from that life to this one." Brooks answered softly. "Sometimes the strongest people carry the heaviest burdens." News inside a prison never stayed in one office for long. Before the morning count had even ended, one maintenance worker mentioned the story to another officer. An officer quietly repeated it near the recreation gate. Within an hour, fragments of the truth drifted through every housing unit. By afternoon recreation, dozens of inmates found quiet reasons to glance toward Marcus as he walked into the yard. He noticed the extra attention but showed no sign that it bothered him. He simply found his usual place near the fence and began his familiar stretching routine. Leonard Price approached with an amused smile. "Looks like your secret finally escaped." Marcus gave a small shrug. "Secrets usually do." Leonard laughed softly. "Most people would enjoy this moment." Marcus watched a pair of birds glide beyond the prison walls before answering. "Respect that comes from fear never lasts. Respect that comes from truth arrives on its own." Several yards away, Travis stood completely still after overhearing two inmates discussing Marcus's career. One of them pulled an old sports magazine from beneath his shirt, carefully preserved for years inside his locker. The cover displayed a younger Marcus Hayes raising both gloves beneath championship lights. After defending his world title, Travis took the magazine with trembling hands. His eyes moved from the photograph to the man quietly standing near the fence. The resemblance was undeniable. The calm expression, the broad shoulders, even the slight scar above Marcus's left eyebrow matched perfectly. Memories rushed back from childhood Saturdays spent watching championship fights with his father, cheering for the disciplined champion who always treated opponents with dignity after every victory. Travis lowered the magazine very slowly. The confident smile that had defined him for years quietly disappeared. For the first time since entering Cedar Ridge, he realized that the man he had spent days trying to provoke had never been avoiding confrontation out of fear. Marcus Hayes had simply chosen something far more difficult. He had chosen self-control when everyone around him expected anger. That evening, the atmosphere inside Cedar Ridge felt different in ways that no official report could ever describe. Conversations grew quieter whenever Marcus Hayes walked past, not because anyone feared him, but because they had finally begun to understand him. Respect had replaced curiosity. Even the correctional officers noticed the subtle change. Men who usually rushed through dinner now stepped aside to let Marcus pass first. Others greeted him with a simple nod instead of suspicious stares. Marcus responded the same way he always had, offering a warm smile and thanking everyone who showed even the smallest act of kindness. Nothing about his behavior changed after the truth became known. That surprised people more than the revelation itself. Leonard Price shook his head as they returned from the dining hall. If I had spent years being called world champion, I would probably remind everyone every chance I got. Marcus laughed softly. Championship belts stay in trophy cases. Character follows you everywhere. Leonard smiled, realizing that Marcus had not lost the qualities that once made people admire him. He had simply carried them into a place where very few expected to find them. Later that afternoon, Officer Raymond Brooks approached Marcus during recreation. He carried no folder this time, only quiet respect. "Mr. Hayes," he began, "I owe you an apology." Marcus looked surprised. "For what?" Brooks smiled gently. "When you first arrived, I read your file before I met you. I thought I understood who you were. I was wrong." Marcus nodded thoughtfully. "Most people judge papers before people. It happens." Brooks hesitated before asking the question that had stayed with him for days. "Why did you never tell anyone about your career?" Marcus looked toward the fading sunlight stretching across the prison yard. "Because if respect depends on yesterday, then it is not real respect. I wanted people to meet the man I am today, not the athlete I used to be." Brooks remained silent for several moments, realizing those words carried more wisdom than anything he had heard in years. Across the yard, Travis Cole stood alone near the walking track, watching the conversation from a distance. For the first time in as long as anyone could remember, no one surrounded him. The confidence that had once drawn followers now felt strangely empty. After several minutes, he finally walked toward Marcus, each step slower than the one before. Leonard quietly excused himself, sensing the conversation belonged to only two men. Travis stopped a few feet away. He opened his mouth twice before any words came out. "I watched your fights with my father when I was a kid," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. Marcus listened without interrupting. Travis lowered his eyes. "I spent days trying to prove something to everyone else." He paused, searching for the courage to continue. "Turns out I was only proving how little I understood about real strength." Marcus looked at him with the same calm expression he had shown from the beginning. There was no satisfaction in his face, no desire to embarrass him in return, only quiet understanding. "Every person gets another chance to become better," Marcus said. "The difficult part is deciding to take it." Travis slowly nodded. The weight he had carried for years seemed to soften, if only slightly. Around them, several inmates watched in complete silence. They had expected revenge. They had expected humiliation. Instead, they witnessed something far more powerful. They watched a man who had once stood beneath championship lights choose grace over pride once again. As the evening whistle echoed across Cedar Ridge and the setting sun painted long golden shadows across the concrete yard, many of the men standing there realized they had not just witnessed the story of a famous boxer. They had witnessed the difference between winning against another person and winning against yourself. Several months passed, and the rhythm of Cedar Ridge Correctional Facility slowly changed in ways that could never be measured by official reports. Every Tuesday and Thursday afternoon, a small group of inmates gathered in the recreation yard before the sun dipped behind the tall concrete walls. There was no championship ring waiting for them, no roaring crowd, no television cameras, only faded pavement, worn athletic shoes, and a man who believed every person deserved another chance to stand a little taller than the day before. Marcus Hayes never called himself coach, yet that was exactly what everyone began calling him. He taught balance before strength. He taught patience before confidence. Most importantly, he taught that the greatest victory was learning to master your own choices. Officer Raymond Brooks often watched the sessions from the observation tower with quiet admiration. During his 35 years in corrections, He had witnessed countless rehabilitation programs begin with excitement and disappear within weeks. This one was different. Attendance kept growing because Marcus never promised miracles. He simply showed up, listened, encouraged, and reminded every man that discipline could rebuild what anger had nearly destroyed. Even Travis Cole became one of the regular faces in the group. He arrived early, stayed late, helped clean the recreation area afterward, and slowly earned back something he had not possessed for years: trust. One afternoon, Brooks found Travis helping an elderly inmate carry books across the yard. The sight made him smile. Months earlier, few people would have believed such a change possible. Brooks walked over to Marcus as the class finished stretching. Beneath the warm Carolina sky, "You have done something we could not accomplish with rules alone," he said quietly. Marcus looked across the yard where laughter replaced arguments and respectful conversation replaced constant tension. "People change when someone believes they still can," he replied. Brooks nodded thoughtfully. Those words stayed with him long after his shift ended. Not long afterward, Marcus received news that his sentence had been reduced following the successful appeal of his case. New evidence had confirmed what he had quietly accepted from the beginning. On the morning of his release, inmates lined the corridor as he carried the same worn Bible and the same small duffel bag he had brought through those gates months earlier. He had entered Cedar Ridge with almost nothing, yet somehow he was leaving behind something far greater than trophies or headlines. Leonard Price embraced him with tears in his eyes. Travis stepped forward next. Neither man spoke immediately. Finally, Travis extended his hand. "Thank you," he said simply. Marcus shook it with a warm smile. "Make every tomorrow better than yesterday." Those were the last words Travis heard before the gates slowly opened. Outside, sunlight poured across the parking lot with a warmth Marcus had not felt in years. He paused for one quiet moment, closed his eyes, and took a deep breath of free air. Behind him, Officer Brooks stood watching through the security window. He realized that the greatest lesson inside Cedar Ridge had never been about boxing. It had never been about fame. It had never been about proving who was stronger. It was about a man who refused to let humiliation define his character, who answered disrespect with dignity, who transformed bitterness into hope, and who reminded everyone that true champions are recognized long before they ever receive a title. As Marcus walked toward the open road without looking back, the morning light stretched across the pavement before him, and the prison walls behind him seemed just a little less cold than they had the day he first arrived.